Any tips for AD carry to get the master? Yeah, probably role swap. Your role is so low impact.
How many times in the past years have you heard ADC mains crying about how much their role sucks? I bet the answer is a lot. Everyone knows that ADC mains complain all the time, all they do is whine, but here's the thing, the last couple seasons they were actually right about being the victims. If you were fancying participating in a social experiment on the endurance of the human mind, you just had to look ADC in a game of League of Legends. Then you would proceed to cope that surely scaling would eventually enable you to make an impact, while your support just roams around the map. It felt like in your mind, when you were about to get into a game, you thought you were gonna be the isekai anime protagonist. But once the game loaded, you were actually Yamcha from Dragon Ball Z. And if you're a newer player, you've only known the Suffering era. Maybe you have even lived through the Yumisari disaster, where the role was actually strong, but that's only if you had a literal parasite attached to you. The thing is, ADC is good now, like really good. So you might be wondering, how is it possible that a small amount of gold injection, or the item changes and coming to lane a couple seconds faster, can turn a glorified cannon minion into the strongest role in the game? To find out why, we need to first understand the past. For years, Riot's balancing team was stuck. If they buffed ADC for solo queue, they broke pro play. And if they nerf ADC because of pro play, well, marksman role might as well just be a cannon minion that gives more gold. But it wasn't always like this. Back in the day, ADC was meant to be an actual carry role, it's in the name. So then, why did this change? What made ADC such a frustrating role to play solo queue in the last couple seasons? Reason number one was the support's divorce. Basically, supports used to have a really low pick rate in solo queue, and to fix this, Riot made them more and more independent, have more agency and more fun, quote unquote, but that means fun for themselves, not for the rest. And I'm talking about broken cheap items and, you know, things like roaming with no punishment. ADC felt like the movie Home Alone. Your support is your parents and they just forgot about you in your lane, and the burglars are a full lethality Rengar and an electrocute bard hitting you for 250 per auto for some reason that's allowed. I don't. If a support roams all the time, he actually doesn't really fall behind. All of the punishment that a support should get actually gets transferred into the ADC. So you had zero agency while your support was busy winning the game for someone else. Agency in League is a zero-sum game. You can't give agency to a role without taking agency away from others. Reason number two was objective fatigue. ADC wants to farm for power spike, but if there's objectives coming up every single minute, you can't really get to choose when to play an objective with actual power spike and good items. This is why AD carry was so much worse in solo queue compared to competitive, because in competitive you can actually tell your teammates to wait for a certain power spike for these objectives. I think the fact that you had to constantly fight objectives also made your farm go down. You will see that in the past, ADCs used to have way more farm on average in Halo than they did in the last couple seasons. They are constantly forced to fight objectives and they have no gold and they are constantly giving up waves. So there were definitely more issues, such as also the fact that there's too many mages in the bot lane. You know, you can also talk about things like the items being extremely bad for ADC the last couple years. ADC have had the worst item components and build paths in the game. This means that the fantasy of farm and scale to be the hero late game was completely dead. Of course you could still climb on ADC and a lot of people did it, but the fact that even better players such as pros that went to bootcamp in other servers during international competitions played jungle even if they were ADC mains, and this is a real story that happened, well, that just proved that the role was really frustrating. Not impossible, but just frustrating. It's just not worth the effort if other roles existed. Are 2026 changes all that different?
Great. A dramatic entrance.
First, the travel time penalty from base is kinda dead. There was a global buff to Homeguards. On paper, getting back to lane 3 or 4 seconds faster doesn't sound like a game breaker, especially if everyone gets it and not just you, so why would it buff ADCs in particular? First of all, it's a nerf to teleport by narrowing the tempo gap between teleporting back to lane or walking back to lane. So mages are still good of course, and they are still high win rate in bot lane, but if you do end up queuing up against a mage, it feels less frustrating than before. You need to realize that this also is a huge buff to mid and late game ADC. It's because now you have a bigger window to farm, get power spike, recall, and do that before the objective comes up. And I need to also address some misinformation that I read. Some people, even high-elo players, mentioned that, well, killing people feels bad early now because they come to lane so fast with the new Homeguards, and this is actually false. You see, in the past, the Homeguards had a different amount of movement speed depending on whether you came back to lane after dying or after recalling. So if you died, you would come back to lane faster, whereas now the Homeguards are completely the same amount of speed and duration whether you died or not. That means that compared to before, killing is more punishment to a person who died, because you can actually shove, recall and come back, and the person who died and came back to lane can't crash it. So now actually killing is more snowbally and OP than before. Next reason, we have the increased gold, meaning the quest, and the item changes, as well as the crit changes. So first of all, I want to mention that I think the 7 item thing was kind of a bait. I have reached 7 items maybe in 1 game out of 20, so that's like 5 games out of 100. So that's not that big of a deal for me. Like in those games it did feel powerful, of course. The biggest OP thing about the ADC quest is the lump sum of gold and increased gold from minions. Since you're farming so much more than before, it synergizes really well with getting 2 extra gold per minion, and the lump sum of gold allows you to reach the 2nd item power spike for important dragon or herald fights, and the 3rd item power spike super consistently, which didn't happen before. So far we have that. You have more tempo around the map, you can catch more waves than before, and you have more gold as well. Better power spikes, better tempo, constant farm and XP and gold. The crit changes also make it so that, in my opinion, the 1st and 2nd items feel really powerful. AD carries didn't have a power spike, most of them, until 3rd items usually. But now I feel like AD carries do have a 1st item power spike, because if you rush a crit item as 1st item, that's already 200% damage on the crit. So that's why you see so many people rushing, like, you know, you have the Essence River rushes, things like that. They feel so powerful as a 1st item. The 3rd reason I want to talk about the decrease in invadings from jungler and the amount of vision that there is in the map now. So first of all, I have a question for you and I want you to type in the comments. Have you seen a level 1 invade that was good or worth it so far in 2026? I have seen only 1 invade in the whole season so far, and it was terrible for the team who did it. Solo laners are likely to roam a bit less than before. They still do it, and it's still fine to do it if you get a lot from it, but the main point I think is the vision. So let me ask you another question that I also want you to answer in the comments. What role of the 5 roles in the game would you think is the most benefited from that one? Hyperscaling, mages and ADCs. So this is because I can now farm mid lane in mid and late game without being scared because of the Phaelites, and this is insane to me. Nobody's mentioning how the Phaelites is a direct buff to ADC. But I still haven't mentioned the main thing that makes this all wrap up in a nice ADC loving package. And that is the most important change of the patch, and in my experience, what was making ADC the most miserable in 2025 season compared to before. That's right, Atakhan is gone, boys and girls. Atakhan was a heinous tax on the ADC role. Why? Remember that in mid game, you're a Roomba robot catching waves and going back and forth from base and mid lane, and sometimes when you get prio or something, you can like get out of mid lane and get objectives. When they introduced Atakhan, notice that Atakhan is the farthest place possible from mid lane on the map. So the role that got the most hurt by Atakhan is the role that plays in mid lane, which is ADC in mid and late game. They were forcing you to make a choice. Contest the side lane objective, which is really far from your farm, and lose 4 waves of farm on average, or stay mid and get the prio mid, which is not that useful for Atakhan anyway, and make your team tilt into oblivion because they are gonna lose Atakhan. It was a lose-lose. So for me, I always had the feeling that Atakhan was the worst, most uncomfortable game mechanic to ever exist from the point of view of an AD carry. Never mind the fact that after pushing mid lane when you wanna rotate to Atakhan, good luck doing that without Phaelites and without proper vision from your support, so you end up depending on your support even for that. Even in a good game, you will drop perfect CS scores just because of the goddamn thing. But now that it's gone, and that recalls are faster, and that I have more vision around mid lane, so I can rotate to objectives comfortably, while I can simply perma-push every single mid wave and become extremely fed quite fast. So in conclusion, is ADC the best role in solo queue? Well, it might be just a trauma from how bad it was before. Definitely it's the best it's been in years. But here's the catch. Since you finally have the resources, you finally have the agency, that also means you no longer have the excuses. If you can't carry with all of these things, with 11 CS per minute, 7 items and a whole map full of vision, it's not the role anymore. It's you. I've done over 4,000 sessions with hundreds of students. If you want to be one of them, I'll be dropping the link to a coaching in the description. By the way, I have around 450 5-star reviews in multiple platforms. Even if you want a role swap to ADC, seeing how broken it is right now, I think this will be a perfect moment to do so. You can even schedule a free call with me. Just go to the description and think about it. Alright, leave a comment, subscribe and like, and tell me if you like this type of content, so I know what to do in the future. Thank you a lot for watching.